Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Hello, and welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander. My friends, they would tell you I like to ask the hard questions. You know who I am in the group. I'm the person that's saying, okay, I'm going to ask this question, but don't feel like you have to answer it. And now I can be that friend for you too. What does it take for a friendship to be a constant in your life for over 2 decades? That's what we're talking about today. On today's episode, I am joined by my guest, Elise. Now, Elise is a productivity coach who helps women in charge make the shifts from overwhelm to taking back control of their time. That's what she does on the day-to-day. But when she's off the clock, she is a wife, an auntie, a friend. Elise lets us in behind the scenes of what I think she would say is one of the most meaningful relationships in her life, her friendship with Andrea. She tells us all about how they became friends, the process of building that friendship, what it was like to go through not 1, not 2, but I think 3 major life shifts, if I'm counting correctly in there. I'm sure that there are many more that Elise didn't even share. We talk a little bit about what it's like to let each other into the mundane, the day-to-day, and how that impacts their friendship. You know, you've probably heard me talk quite a bit about this idea that it's the small, mundane details that make the biggest impact in our friendships. It's just those consistent little moments that add up. And that is definitely what Elise and Andrea have figured out how to do long-term, whether it was random chats about pop culture, walks, Marco Polo, and more. With that, let's get to today's episode. I think that this is going to be an episode that so many people listen to and get a little behind the scenes, because this idea that maintaining a friendship for a really long time is somehow better, or like, I want to say worthier or higher, is really pushed. Mm-hmm. But in reality, being able to do that is so much work. Like, we're not acknowledging what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I tell people that all the time, like, yeah, they might have been friends for 20 years, but most people aren't talking about the highs and the lows and the pauses and the breaks and the heartbreak and the rebuilding. Like, this is going to be an episode that I think gives people like a taste of what it really takes. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your friendship with Andrea and how long you've been friends?
Sure. Andrea and I, oh my gosh. So Andrea is married to a friend of mine who's practically like he's a childhood friend. He's practically my cousin. Like, even though we're not related, that's how long we've known each other. That's how long our families have known each other. And so he was like the single guy of all of us couples, right? And he kept looking for somebody, and he finally finds Andrea. And I just was, excited to meet her. And that was probably in 2010, I think. Oh gosh. Oh, Mike, she's going to be mad at me. I'm going to get all the dates wrong, Andrea, if you listen to this later. But there were just like little things that happened where it was her trying to fit into this friend group, right? Where she just like, there were different people that she connected with at different times. And we kind of connected a lot over pop culture. And then her grandmother passed away. And her husband, were they even married yet? I don't think they were married yet, but he was traveling for work when it happened.
Oh.
And her dad called him to say, here's what's going on. I'm about to call her. And then he's like, I'm not there. And so he called me and he was just like, Elise, this is going on. Like, can you go be there with her as soon as she, so she has somebody with her when this is happening, because her whole family's across the country. And so I did. And I don't know if that was the beginning. I'm not quite sure where it all was, but there was something about being able to show up for her in that moment that just started to solidify us, I think, as people that could kind of be around each other in the hard moments. And I think that's like,
Yeah.
I think the biggest part of our friendship is just that ability to hang with each other in those hard moments, as well as have like just a ridiculously good time with each other and make each other laugh like crazy, right? Like it's that whole mix.
Both ends. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So yeah, that's Andrea and I. We've just been through it all, and she's had kids and has been married to, like I said, this great guy friend of mine forever. And I don't have kids, and I got divorced a few years ago, and I was married to a man, and now I'm married to a woman. And so it's just like, we've navigated a lot of stuff together, and it's just kind of crazy to look back at. And I think that having a long relationship, a long friendship is really cool and lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't meet those people till later. Cause like I was in my late 20s, early 30s when we met. You know, this wasn't like a lifelong friend from childhood. This was somebody I met as a grown up, and I wasn't really like accepting applications for new friends at that time. I kind of had my crew and like, you know, like we had all these couple friends, you know, and I don't think I'd ever really had, and this is not anything against any of my other friends, but like, I didn't know what a best friend was like until like these past few years of like realizing that, you know, Andrea and I are actually besties, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That she's kind of like your person that you call when everything's happening. Yeah. And I love that you're calling out when you met, because I do think that's a thing, is that a lot of people feel like they can't meet this like closest friend.
Yeah.
If they haven't met them in their, you know, teens or college days, like if they've missed the boat on that they'll never meet someone. But you are proof that that can happen. We can make meaningful connections all the way until we're in the grave.
Absolutely. Like there's obviously something to be said about shared history, but I think shared histories can keep people together longer than necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be said about my marriage, my first marriage, and even like meeting my wife later in life, right? Too. Like I met my wife when I was almost 40 and oh my gosh, like now I know what love is, right? You know, so it's just like, oh, I get it now, right? You know, and I loved my husband, but we grew up together, right? It was kind of like that growing up together thing that bonded us so much. And so for Andrea and I, it's kind of funny because, you know, she has like her best friend from childhood. She has these other close friends. And there's like little parts of me that sometimes feels like, oh, why was she talking to her about this and not me? And even though she talks to me about everything too, but like, I'll have these little moments of like, oh, I'm not one of those friends for her, but I'm a different friend for her and for who she is now. And that feels just as special. But, you know, I can try to be jealous if I really wanted to be, but I'm not.
I mean, I call that a present friend. So I call it, right, like currently you and Andrea are doing life together. You are very much like in the know about all the present stuff. And I don't know what Andrea's calling. It doesn't matter what Andrea's calling, you know, her high school best friends about, whether it's to tell them the same things they're telling you, or there might be things that were before you two met.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
She could tell you about it, but it wouldn't like hit quite the same way because you don't have the same history. And I love that you're talking about that, because so many people don't want to acknowledge that there's like sometimes a little jealousy there. And you're like, wait, what's going on? And without really, you know, we don't have a lot of language for friendships. There's not a lot of ways to describe it. So like we can say best friend, but like best friend for what? Is something I say all the time. Yeah. You may not be her best friend for like childhood memories. Because you weren't there. So that would be a reason she'd have to call them, or she would call them maybe. When you understand that, you can like kind of logically rationalize it. You're like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense.
That's such a great distinction, because when I think about Andrea and I, it's like she has her friends for parenting and motherhood that I can't be there for her that way. And that was a big transition point for us too in our friendship, that like it wasn't obvious that it'd be a transition point in terms of how we would relate to each other, because like she knew I was going to be like an all-in kind of auntie, I think, with her kiddos, because she just knows I love kids, and that's how I was going to be. But it was different to kind of see her like relate to my big sister, for example, who had kids at the exact same time. They had their kids 1 week apart. So they were trying to get pregnant at the same time. They were pregnant at the same time. They had their babies a week apart. And so it was like all of those things. And so it was kind of like, it's like I didn't have a membership card to that circle of friendship and communication with her. And not that, she didn't share some of her struggles with me as a parent or around breastfeeding or around whatever it might be. But I certainly couldn't relate in the same way. I could like relate through my sister, like, oh yeah, my sister's experiencing the same thing, but like, that's not the same as being able to say, oh my God, I know it's so exhausting those first few, whatever, like I just couldn't be that person for her in that way, but I could be the person that could be like, oh, I'm so sorry, honey. Like, this is so hard. Is there anything I could do to help? Kind of thing. Or like, you're doing great and I can encourage her, but it's just in a different way. And so that was like a little bit of like a tug on my heartstrings of like, oh, I don't get to know her in this way that everybody else, like all these other women get to know her in.
I love that Elise is talking about this. Because I think that so many friendship problems happen because of this exact scenario. We aren't the right person for our friends. In this case, Elise is not a mom. She couldn't quite relate on the exact same level to all of the newborn experiences. And because messaging has really convinced us that in order to be this closest friend, we have to be this all or nothing, there for everything, always available, always their person. When that's not true, we can really feel like something's wrong in our friendship. And either the person who needs support doesn't go get it, or the friend who feels, in this case, Elise, feels like she's on the outside of this experience. Like, yeah, I get that you want to be there for your friend. We all want to be there. But it's knowing that sometimes we're not the right person and caring more that our friend gets the right support than caring that support comes from us. Is there some sadness there? Sure. Yeah. We love our friends. We would love to be able to relate to them in all the ways and all the places and be the right person. But that's not reality. And I think if we could accept that, a lot more friendships would make it long term. Because a fight like this quite often can be the reason, well, it's not even a fight, a moment like this in a friendship, this discomfort, especially as we become adults and we are dynamic, unique people and we are different than our friends and life paths diverge. Navigating that, doing the work to stay friends, even though you're going after different experiences and goals, that is where a lot of friendships break apart. Yeah, you can listen, you can have more flexibility to show up and help.
Yep.
You can hear all the stories, but yeah, you can't like quite relate the same way. I totally understand that. And I think that that's such an important, it's like, do I want to call it jealousy? Maybe the like tug that you were talking about is like, I think we love people so much that we want to be there for them, but sometimes we just can't. So there's that like tug of, I wish I could do this for you, but then you have to be happy that they can find like your sister, those other people who can support them in those specific ways that you can't. That doesn't negate the fact that we wish we could because we love them so much.
Yeah.
Like I'm truly dealing with, well, I think we're all dealing with this. People are going to listen to this episode and be like, oh my gosh, that happens all the time. Like we have some friends, I'm actually flying down to like go help take care of them. They have some life stuff going on and they need someone to come deal with their dog and cook for them and things like that. And I have wanted to be there for them since the beginning, but it just didn't make sense for me to be the person in the beginning. And now we're months in and, she called and said, can you come? But like, doesn't mean I haven't wanted to the whole time. Right. I just wasn't the right choice. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's just because we love people so much that we want to do it.
And I think I know I'm wired for that a little bit of just kind of like, my wife kind of laughs about it, or not laughs about it, actually. It's more like she sees it in me and helps me see it of like when something is happening that I can't do anything about is such a struggle for me. Like when something's happening for somebody else and I can't do anything like to make anything better or to fix it or to do, it's like, it's so hard for me because I just want to like help. And sometimes there's nothing you can actually do in some of those moments. And it's hard. It's hard to watch. Andrea and I have both gone through our own things in life, and it's hard to just watch somebody else struggle and have a hard time and not be able to do something for them. And it's also just like, I'm a coach, my profession. And so it's just like, that's one of the things I have to be careful about as a coach is like, you can't want something more for somebody than they want it for themselves. It's true in life, no matter what.
Yeah.
But it's something I'm especially watchful for as a coach or in a coaching capacity. But it's like something I have to watch out for in all my relationships because I just want so much for people. But it's like, it doesn't matter if they don't want it. Right. So
yeah, we always have to remember, like, we're just really on the sidelines of all this. Even when we're in the relationship, right? Even like when you're in the relationship with Andrea and you're like a go-to person she calls, or me with my friends, like we're still us and they're still them, and we can't do all the things and fix all the things and be all the things. I say this all the time that like the older we get, when we were younger, and you had a best friend, your lives were so simple. You probably went to the same school, understood who was on that sports team they were on, and you were on this sports team, or you were in ASB or whatever it was. And you knew what neighborhoods they lived in, and your lives like were pretty similar. And as adults, our lives are so different. The career paths we pick, the places we live, kids, no kids, married, not married, like life choices diverge, and we just can't be all the things to someone because we're too complex at this point.
I love that you brought up that all things to people, because that is something I've seen. It's something that I experienced when I first started dating my wife, and also something that I appreciate about the relationship that Andrea and I have is that with my wife, I remember we weren't very far into dating, and she said something about this therapist that she's had for like 18 years. And I remember thinking, oh, thank God. I don't have to be managing her emotions. I was very codependent I didn't realize it, but I was very codependent in my first marriage. And I was like, oh, it's not just all on me. It's not all on me to take care of her this way. And she's already taking responsibility for that. And I think that's one of the best things for Andrea and I. And she talks about having a therapist publicly. So I know I can say that, but like we both have, our mental health professionals that we work with and that we can go to. And we do a lot of processing with each other, and we like do downloads from our sessions and stuff like that. And so we're like, oh, here's what happened. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's just like another place for us to be able to support each other. But we know that each person has support outside of us. And I think that's really important in any relationship. And
Agreed.
I'm grateful for it in my relationship with Andrea, for sure.
Agreed. In any relationship, it's so important. So something I'm curious about, like you and Andrea became friends, but like you went to support her in a moment of grief. That's a pretty vulnerable moment. Do you feel like that skyrocketed maybe like the vulnerability you have, or do you feel like it just was that one moment and then you still had to like build trust? And I'm asking that because a lot of people, I think, are looking for this like in sometimes to really get close to someone. And I'm not sure if it's really like one moment. So what was your experience?
No, I think it was definitely a building trust thing. I took much longer to be the vulnerable one than she did. It took me being in crisis to really be vulnerable. And I didn't realize that's what I was doing. But it took me going through divorce, which was only 7 years ago. I'm saying that in terms of my relationship with Andrea has been much longer than that. Right. And so by that point, she and I were both like aware of like some highs and lows here and there, but it was more like obvious ones, like, oh, like somebody gets sick or dies, or like those kind of family things that can happen that are hard, and the life things that can happen that are hard. But it was interesting because it was her first going through stuff like after pregnancy and having kids and all that kind of stuff, where I was kind of hearing more of her struggle and vulnerability. And then for me, it was going through the divorce where I really had to make a choice about not trying to carry things on my own anymore and letting people in. And I had my sister, basically, my now wife, and Andrea. Like those were the people that and my sister-in-law. I grouped my sister and sister-in-law together. They're married. And so it's like I had those two, Andrea and my now wife, to be able to navigate all of the highs and lows and like just the raw emotions that I was never letting anybody into before.
Yeah.
And I felt like I could do that with her because of how much she had let me in to a lot of her lows that she was facing through having kids and all that kind of stuff of trying to have kids and having kids and just navigating all that and health stuff that came up because of that. And so it's just like there became so much to navigate. The funny thing is that we didn't always do it like on the phone or face to face. We did it over Marco Polos.
Before the conversation shifts topics, something really great happened in this last little bit of the conversation. And I don't want to glaze over it. I don't want to miss the important message here. Elise was saying that it took her a lot longer to be vulnerable. And this really hit me because recently, this was actually a conversation in our household. You see, I think quite often we're looking for the other person to be vulnerable. A lot of messages say out there, to get people to like you, to connect with them, to get them to care about you. Pay attention to them. Look to them to open up to you, right? We want everybody else to open up to us. But we're not thinking so much about whether we are also opening up. Like somehow we've been convinced that if we just give all of our attention to our friend, that that's enough. But we love being there for our friend, listening to our friend, feeling like we know things about our friends. And if we don't reciprocate and also open up, then we're denying them that same opportunity. So let me tell you a little story. Recently, we had a very dear friend of ours call us out a little bit in the most loving way. But he said, every time we talk, you spend the entire time asking about his life, what's happening with his family, his job, his feelings, his goals. And then he says, when I ask you, you just minimize yourself. You say, well, it's fine. We're busy. We're working a lot. We have this trip coming up we're really excited about. But like, what about you? What about you? And we always redirect it back. And he said, it's getting really hard because I feel like I don't really know you anymore. And boy, oh boy, was that a stab to the heart. But he's right. You see, Michael and I had just really convinced ourselves that our life isn't as complex or hard or difficult as our friend's life. That they had just made a big move, has 2 kids, wife went back to the job that she wanted, that we don't have as many obligations as child-free people, that our life is going pretty well. So we wanted to really give him a place to be seen amidst all the stuff happening in his life. And we loved giving him that space. So we really wanted to offer it up. But in doing so, we didn't give him the opportunity to see us. So this is my long story, my long example to say that as much as we focus on the other person opening up to us, I think we all need to turn an eye to ourselves sometimes, myself included. We have a Marco Polo episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So Marco Polo became, because she was nursing at all hours, right? Of the day and night, right? And that would be her time to just kind of vent and debrief and update me, because we just couldn't catch each other at the right times.
Yeah.
And it kept us together. It's so funny. And now we use it more than ever. We probably just today we've Marco Poloed back and forth at least 4 times. And sometimes it's a 15-minute one, and, where she was telling me something that went wrong with her website and blah, blah, blah. And, she just kind of updating me on whatever. And I can come back with a funny little comment or oh, have you tried this? And we just have this back and forth there that actually works. And then when we're together, it's just like, we just pick up no problem, right? So it's kind of funny because we wouldn't have time to be on the phone at the same time otherwise. But somehow while I'm making lunch, I can listen to Marco Polo that she did while she was driving her son to school, right? And so that way we get to stay connected. It's completely unexpected. And I totally pay for the premium version of Marco Polo.
Oh, me too. Me too.
So just so that we can have that. Like that is, I literally invest in our relationship.
Yeah.
Because
using your time, resources, and attention. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I love it because you've made like an intentional choice you're saying you invest in, but you two have like found a way that works in life's current season. You're paying for the membership, which if people are like, why would you do that? It allows you to like send voice memos. So if you're sitting in the dark nursing and it maybe doesn't make sense to send a video or text message, it really does add a layer. This is not sponsored by Marco Polo.
Yeah, exactly.
But it like adds a layer to it. And you are consciously choosing to do that, to stay close and present, I'll say. Like to stay present in like the ins and outs of your day.
It makes me feel closer to her, to have that. And, like I said, when we do our debriefs on like a coaching session or therapy or anything like that, like we could just do that there and be like, okay, so here's what we talked about and here's what's going on. Or like one of us like has like a health issue. It's like, all right, just got back from the doctor and here's what's happening. Like I had a partial tear in my ACL and this summer or this spring. And so it's just been like the little updates, like, as I get in the car, like right after I get off the phone with my wife, I'm like firing up Marco Polo for my drive home and telling Andrea everything that happened at the doctor's office. It's just like, it's just what we do. It's how we stay connected and it works really well.
But it's like such a beautiful example of like so many people, I think, wish they had, I'm going to say quote unquote, like closer friends, right? Or this best friend. And I say to people all the time, like, I think such a big reason we feel close to our closest people is because we do life with them. Like we are debriefing kind of in real time or updating them or telling them about the doctors or, turning on Marco Polo while you're in the car going to carpool or, if you have the flexibility and the possibility, like being in the car to go to carpool. Like it's the mundane stuff that makes us feel really close.
Yep.
And that, I think, is what a lot of people want in these really long-term friendships. And when it doesn't feel that way, but they're like, this is my closest person, a lot of people are confused. They're like, why don't I feel as connected as I once did? They're my closest person. It's like you've gone out there and intentionally made choices to keep this alive and feeling this way, even a decade plus into this friendship.
Well, one of the things, it makes me think of this like analogy I've always had in my head about like a string of like party lights. And like the bright light moments are awesome, right? Like every year we watch every single Best Picture nomination for the Oscars. She and I do every year. Somehow we watch them all. Even during the pandemic, we just would push play from our own homes at the same time, right? But when we were not quarantined, like we go to the movie, we go to a theater together or we rent it together and we watch all of the Best Picture nominees, right? So that's like a season. That's like a pocket of time where we're seeing each other all the time and we're making an extra effort. It's a light bulb moment for us, right? And then in the holiday, or actually this summer, we're going to be with them on a camping trip, right? And so that's going to be another light bulb moment, right? And so those are great. Those are great. But like in between can be darkness if you're not careful, right? And so we just make sure that in between we have those, like you said, those day-to-day, like just life stuff, touch points and updates. And I didn't know how much that would mean. At first, like, so part of having the premium version of Marco Polo, and Andrea will laugh at this, is that I can listen to her at a faster speed.
Oh, yeah.
Because Andrea's Marco Polos are on the long side compared to mine, because she'll do them while she's driving. And so she'll just kind of keep chatting the whole time she's doing the drive, which means when she's having to make a left-hand turn and she's having to watch traffic, she's not really talking to me, but I'm sitting there, So it's so nice to have that premium version where I can do that.
I know.
But those, right? But those are the, like, it's on that drive when she remembers most random thing that she might forget to tell me about before. And where her brain is going, and she can just share those things with me that I wouldn't get, if we met for cocktails like once a month or something, that's just not the same for us.
Yeah, they'd get filtered out because you only have 1 or 2 hours.
Yeah,
so it's not important enough. But that's the stuff that makes us feel close to each other. You can feel close in other ways, but there's some sense of familiarity when you know what she was doing last Tuesday, when you know the random, like, I don't know, she bought the type of yogurt she hates and it's accidentally in her fridge. And what is she going to do with it now? That kind of stuff adds up over time.
Totally.
And the string lights, I use like a similar analogy of like, you want to leave breadcrumbs till the next cookie. Otherwise, if there's no breadcrumbs, you just arrive at the cookie and like, that's great. But then you have to, well, you don't have to, but a lot of people will end up spending a good amount of time on that barbecue, on that trip, trying to like catch up. And then you're missing out on being in the moment. So if you can just do these small things in the middle, you can really just fully be present in the moment.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I'm like the type of person where I can see somebody after years and reconnect very quickly. Like I can kind of talk to anybody, whatever, but it's not the same. It's not the same as having, somebody that again, even from childhood that I've known forever, like I was a roommate with or whatever it might be. Right. It's just, it isn't the same as having those kind of like almost daily touch points. Like I actually was just thinking today, like, she hasn't sent me a Marco Polo yet. I wonder what's going on. And then like, I get down to my desk and there's one in there. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'll listen to that at lunch, because she's usually the first one to do it. And then I respond, like sometimes I'm the first to do it, but it's like, I get to like over the weekends, we don't typically do it because we're both just like with our families and doing stuff. But it's like, it's throughout the week is when it tends to happen. And it's just funny because then like on Mondays, oftentimes I'll be like, here's what I did over the weekend.
Yeah.
Before we started recording, we were talking about I was over at the Gorge in Central Washington for a concert. And so I was there on Friday night with my wife, my sister, and her wife. And then we saw the lineup for Saturday and we're like, okay, we want to, you know what? We're going to stay. We can actually, my sister can figure out what they can do with the kids. We got dog coverage, blah, blah, blah. We're going to stay. And I'm like, so we start thinking about other people we should talk into coming over from Seattle, which for those of you who aren't local, it's a long drive to go get to Central Washington. And I called Andrea. And it's so funny because like my sister called one of her friends that was in town, that happened to be in town. And that pitch was so different than the way I pitched it to Andrea because I know how she is. I know how she thinks. I can't just like spring something on her. She's a planner. She's this. So I was like, my sister and her wife and my wife were all laughing at me because of like the tone of my call versus the tone of my sister's call was like so different but it's like, I know Andrea, like if I'm going to get her to come over here, I'm going to have to do it in a certain way. And so we got to have a bright light moment this weekend, right? We got to have a nice bright party light moment being at this concert together, having this impromptu trip together where, she had to make things happen and her husband had to step in and help more with the kids. And like, she really had to pull that off for herself. But that's like part of our friendship too, is like supporting each other in those ways of like, honey, you got to get out of the house. You got to give yourself something right now. Yeah. Right. And likewise for her, where she can help me. Like I was possibly going to have to get knee surgery. And she was just like, girl, you better not be going on that camping trip then. Like if you do have to get surgery, you got to not come on that trip, right? Where she's just like, you got to take care of yourself on this, or we can just we know these things about each other because of these day-to-day interactions that we can kind of call each other on things gently and lovingly. Like it's interesting how little friction we have had in our relationship, considering the way we're able to kind of call each other out on stuff. And I don't know if it's because it's Marco Polo, so you have kind of a time to like
process,
take it in and process. But I also think it's just a level of time we've had together where it's like, I know she knows me. Like she knows me, like, okay, she's probably got this right. But I can handle it from her better than I can handle it from my wife, who is amazing. But there's just something about like how she and I are able to do that with each other that feels safe even when it's challenging.
Yeah. And I mean, I would venture to say that part of that just has to do with the fact that when you are called out, because you're being so consistent and sharing so much of life, and you each have a pretty clear picture of the backstory.
Yeah.
So when somebody's saying something, it's not like there's hidden facts in the background necessarily.
Yeah.
Where then you're coming back to like, well, I didn't tell you X, Y, and
Yeah, you
Z,
didn't
and
know
that's why I
this
didn't
part.
make that decision.
Mhm.
And I think that helps a lot. And
That is so
also
true.
might be the reason that a lot of people don't. If you don't have this consistency, you may not bring up something to a friend because you realize like, I don't know if I know the full story. So I'm just gonna maybe not go there because they might be making that for a reason. But when you are really letting each other in the way you and Andrea are, that creates this space to like ask these harder questions and push each other a little bit.
No, I think that's totally true because I watch myself do that in other relationships where I'm like, I don't really know what's going on. I'm not going to say anything kind of thing. Whereas like I said with her, I'm like, what did you just say? You know, like, I can be like, you are not going to say that about yourself or whatever. And she'll come right back at me with, you know, whenever I need that too. It's so great. But you're right. It is that there's very little that we don't know about each other's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, what we're saying is very informed.
When you're in your friendship, like the tenure of your friendship, and I think this is specific, like your friendship is particularly interesting, right? Because you did become closer friends. What did you say? Your late 20s, early 30s?
Mm-hmm.
So you were kind of past the point of high school, college, where that consistency is super easy because life doesn't really have a lot of responsibilities. Was this like a natural progression? Was there a conversation about figuring out consistency? Like, was there a period where this didn't exist and you had to like talk about it and propose like, hey, maybe we should download this Marco Polo app and this would help us? Like,
ooh, dang it. Now I'd be like, hey, can we pull Andrea in real quick and can Marco Polo her real quick and ask her when we got on Marco Polo? One of the things was we lived close enough to each other at one point. Like eventually her and her husband moved pretty close to this crew of people that we all lived in this area.
mm-hmm.
And so I was able to drive over to her house and do morning walks. And we were both wanting to just be more active.
Yep.
And so that was kind of like an anchor point for us to have that consistency. And then we had that for a long time. And then I got divorced, right? And I moved out of the neighborhood. I left the neighborhood. And so even though I wasn't far away, I was also just going through a lot. And I was farther away for sure. It definitely was not as convenient for me to just go on the morning walks anymore.
Yeah.
First, she went back to work was probably the first thing that slowed that down. But like that started to establish some kind of like rhythm of communication between us. And then over time, once we found Marco Polo, like that's just like,
yeah.
So like between like divorce and Marco Polo, like those are the things that brought she and I closer together. We never had a conversation about it. It was kind of more that we just started building the Oscar tradition with each other. Like there were just things that became, or like the fact that we both subscribed at the time to Entertainment Weekly. It was a magazine. It's no longer. It makes us so sad. But like, so we had like these kind of like connection topics that were rhythmic that way too. You know what I mean? To like, it's like this weekly magazine. Be like, oh my God, did you get the whatever episode? Or I could take a picture of it. Like before we did Marco Polo, it was like, I can't even imagine what life would have been like if we had Marco Polo and Entertainment Weekly at the same time. Our minds would have been blown. But it was just like these little things. And again, those were everyday things like a morning walk, a weekly magazine that were just these little connection points. And, you know, we grew up very differently. She's from Nebraska. I'm from Central Washington. And so we grew up differently, but we had these kind of pop culture connection points that were still also different. She's 3 years younger than me. And sometimes that's enough younger that you're missing some overlap, but the majority of overlap is still there. But there's just this like affinity we have for those things that were just, again, these additional little things that just started like weaving this little rope of a friendship together. That was like early on, but over time, more kind of fibers kept getting woven in and woven in and woven in.
Yeah. I call those shared experience roots. I have this whole analogy that has to do with a tree, but basically they're the things like you, one, created a consistent pattern with the walks, like a thing that you felt comfortable doing together that then created space for you to talk more and learn more about each other. And then the Entertainment Weekly is, again, like a topic that you were very comfortable texting about or reaching out about. And you never probably really thought twice about texting about it or talking about it or reaching out about it. But then because you have those, it allows space to say like, oh, well, how was your day? How was your week? How did that doctor's appointment go? Do you still want to go do that thing next weekend? Like it removes the barrier for reaching out. And those are so great for people to have. There's less resistance, I think, when you can find those in a friendship.
Well, and those are the things that then can still hold when other strands fall away, right? It's like not having like one thing with somebody. It's having like so many things that when one thing falls away, there's still something connecting you. And so when she became a parent, a lot of freedom fell away from her, right? A lot of us just going and meeting up for a coffee or drinks or going for walks like on our own, like all these things started falling away. But because we had these other things, like we could still connect on those and still just like remain connected. And so it was when her second child was born that we were doing Marco Polos, and he's 4, because that's when we just started connecting that way. But because we had those other strands, you know, there, we were able to hold on.
I love this. You're confirming this whole framework I made. I mean, I think it's pretty good, but yeah, like I say a lot, there's so much focus on vulnerability, but I think there's something really powerful in variety.
Yeah.
Like the more variety you have of ways to connect, ways you feel comfortable, topics to share, it doesn't need to be all, but like building some variety, like you said, means when I call it roots, you call it strands, like when some of them die, there are still other ones that make it easy for you to stay connected. And then you can use those times that you are still connecting to figure out new ones and rebuild, like joining Marco Polo. And that I think so many people focus on like the depth of knowing someone really well. And if we focus more on like this variety, it would make it easier when life transitions happen, because they are going to happen.
Yep. Whether we want them to or not, they're going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, right. You're getting divorced and moving out of the neighborhood. Suddenly you didn't have the walks, but you still had Entertainment Weekly. You still had the Oscars, and you could use those to then like figure out new ways to stay connected, like adding Marco Polo, and it makes it a more natural transition for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pandemic did that too. Like it reinforced our Marco Polo time, because it was like we just weren't going to be able to be around each other at certain points. Right. And so, like I said, for the Oscar quest, you know, we were just like, all right, we're going to watch this movie on this night. We'll call each other at 7. Actually, Marco Polo at 7. All right. And we'll chit chat a little bit and like, ready, go. Or no, we zoomed. Sorry. We zoomed at 7. And then like, all right, hit start right now. And then we would connect afterwards and talk about the movie together.
Yeah.
Just was like a way to keep that going. And again, if you have enough of the roots, like you're saying, if you have enough of the roots, then you can do that.
Yeah. And they don't need to be complex. I mean, this is showing like they're pretty simple things.
Super simple.
Like Entertainment Weekly, pretty simple thing that can really be something that's like holding your friendships together.
Yeah.
But hopefully you have a few of those to make it easier, you know, when Entertainment Weekly is no longer a magazine and things like that.
And it breaks your heart. And you're like, no, I don't want People Magazine. I want Entertainment Weekly. It's totally different magazines.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say has been like the hardest? I mean, you had some big, like a divorce, kids. Were any of those maybe like a harder transition to navigate than others?
The kids part was hard for me. Yeah. I mean, I know it was hard for her because it was a huge life adjustment. It was hard for me as a friend because, like I was saying, there was that part, there was a strand that I didn't get to have with her, which was motherhood. And I chose not to have kids. That was a conscious choice. I just, at some point early on, I just chose, I just didn't really want to have kids. And it's been a thing for me where it's like, it is hard sometimes because it's a strand I don't have with my sister. It's a strand I don't have with my mom. It's a strand I don't have with Andrea. Or it's a root that I don't have with any of them. Right. And so that was really, sorry, I'm like, let me use your language.
No, you're good.
Because then your audience will be more familiar. Listeners will be more familiar, right? That was a hard transition for me in our friendship because I just felt a little bit like an outsider sometimes. And she never made me feel that way.
Yeah.
I just felt that way. And yeah, I was kind of worried that I was going to lose her, I think. That I was going to lose her to other moms, that I was going to lose her to the kids, that she was going to lose herself, you know, like all of these different things.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like I said, luckily, like I genuinely love kids. And so I wanted to be around her as a mom too, and around the kids and around their family. And so luckily that was a want and a desire for me that allowed us to stay connected that way. I have to imagine for her, and I'm going to have to ask her this now, but I would imagine for her, it would be not so much the divorce, which I'm sure like it shook up all of our friendship world a lot because my husband and I were very much like a hub and we hosted all the things and we gathered all the people and stuff like that. So it was kind of shocking for people. But when I met my wife, Kim, and found somebody that I could connect with so well, who wanted to listen to me and who wanted to spend time with me. Kim is my best friend in a different way, right? Like Kim's my person in such a different way, but there is that vulnerability, that safety that Kim's fostered within our relationship, that I can share these things is actually fed into my relationship with Andrea now. That's made me more vulnerable. But I could imagine that it can be harder because like by the time Andrea can see like a certain movie because of kids' schedules and whatnot, like Kim and I've already seen it because Kim actually likes to watch the same movies I like to watch, whereas my husband didn't, right? And so it's like there can be those kinds of things, but it's so great because like Andrea's so sweet because like my wife is like on the Oscar quest with us. Like Andrea and I have top priority of like we schedule around each other, but her and my wife get along so well. It's like super sweet. And it just makes me so happy that they have their own friendship.
Yep.
Because I think that is important. You got to like your people's person. I think it's hard to not like your bestie's partner.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing. And so I feel grateful that I love her husband and she loves my wife. And that helps our friendship a lot.
And that you're all making it a priority to not only have it be like you and Andrea's friendship, but Andrea's friendship with Kim, your wife, and your friendship with Andrea's cousin, like to nurture all those dynamics, even though they are different.
Yeah. Well, and like, even like we have, you know, obviously we'll have like double date time sometimes, but other times it's like, hey, we'll take care of the kids. So you two, you know, she and her husband can go out. Right. And so there's that part of it too, of like supporting her other relationships. Right. And so like, or one of her besties from high school, right. That like, we've all gone on trips together and I adore her. And like, it's like fostering that friendship too. And that knowing it's kind of like a romantic partnership in that way too, where it's like having faith in your relationship. So you don't have to worry about jealousy. Like, you know who you are to them and you can be okay with them needing other people and having other people.
Yeah. And you want it. You want them to have the support in those ways or those other friends. Like it can't hurt anything. It just makes them a happier, healthier, more supported person, which is like good for your relationship too. It really just like goes around and around and around. I totally get that. I try and make that a very big priority. Like it's not just about my friendship with someone. It's also about them having the other pieces they need. And that's not always me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Elise, I think we could talk about you and Andrea all day. This is like such a beautiful friendship. And I think so many people are going to listen to this and maybe have a new appreciation for a friendship they have that sounds similar, or they might try and develop some new roots and find a little more present time, like using Marco Polo. I'm just really curious to see, because I think that we really did kind of like lift the curtain back today on a friendship. And I know there are lots of people out there who are feeling like strain in friendships that they wish felt a little different. I think you gave so many beautiful, tangible examples. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. And I just have to say, like, if somebody is feeling that strain, that pull, it's like, it really like find your way. It wasn't super intentional for us to find Marco Polo the way that we have. And it could sound silly that some app like is going to be, but like it is, it's what works for us. So like, don't worry about what works for you and your friend, but find something. Like if you really treasure that friendship and you want to grow it, like figure out your way that you can nurture the roots and create more roots possibly, right? With each other. And so for us, it just so happens that Marco Polo's our way to stay just really tightly in a like lovingly connected to each other in an everyday way. Like my goal is to have an everyday life I love. That's always what I'm working towards or working on. And I luckily do have an everyday life I love. And Marco Polo, like with Andrea, is a part of that, right?
Yeah.
It's like that sure there's going to be the bright light moments, but I want everything in between to be lovely as well.
Yeah.
I don't want to be living for those bright light moments with Andrea. I want us to have a nice constancy with each other where we don't have to catch up.
Yeah. Where you're really trying to do life together and be there for each other. Yeah. I love that. There is something so special about episodes like this one. And by that, I mean episodes that are on the surface so simple. You know, we talked about navigating big life changes like divorce and having kids and remarrying. We talked about something so simple like integrating Marco Polo or daily walks. Talked about what it's like to have friends that you reach out to every day and tell the mundane details, those light bulb moments. There are so many tangible examples in this episode of ways that you might approach your friendships. And I know that I record episodes like this and on the surface, they might just seem kind of boring. But I think a lot of times the magic is just in the simple, small ways we consistently show up. And that is, from my understanding, from my vantage point, that is what Elise and Andrea have done in this friendship. Is they've just showed up consistently, been there for each other, trusted the process of building their friendship, rebuilding their friendship, navigating big life changes. And now they have this really beautiful story to tell of a friendship that has lasted decades. And I'm sure is one of the most meaningful relationships in their life. With that, I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.